Merhabalar arkadaşlarım. So some of you from Instagram story have asked me questions, and there's quite a few of them. So I'll try to get to all of them, but it's obviously I can't get to, there's like 100 questions, guys. So I'll get to some of the more interesting ones. The first question that I got was, how do you develop your self-identity through reading and writing? And this is actually a good question. When I was 16 or 18, I had a difficult time with self-identity because it's a time where you need to consider what your contributions to society are going to be, who you're going to be as a person, what do you want to spend like the next 30 or 40, 50, 60, 70 years of your life doing, kind of type deal. But in reality, it's probably only going to be like the next 5 or 10 years of your life. These questions are difficult to deal with, and I actually had some aid from reading, right? So in Western societies, I grew up in Canada, we had a lot of materialism, and I needed to make up my mind about materialism. So I read a lot about Alan Watts, I read a lot about Buddhism or Eastern thought, and how they view materialism. And materialism informs a lot of Western thought. Like in Western culture, you're taught that you need to get a house, you need to have a high-paying job. There's a lot of material things that they teach you that you should have, especially at a young age. And Eastern philosophy can help you deal with those questions and those problems because they give a counter-argument. And so now that you will get like the pro-materialism and the counter-materialism, if you read Buddhism, for example, then okay, you'll be able to inform yourself a lot better. And so in that sense, reading helped me deal with just some of the problems I was facing at 16 and 18. So I would say if you're facing a problem, a book can help you if you read a pro and a con. If you read something that's in favor of one take on that problem and something that's against that one take on that problem, if that makes sense. Okay, so e-readers versus paperbacks or hardcovers. I love paperbacks and hardcovers. They're the go-to. I will virtually never read a book on an e-reader. That being said, I do prefer, to some degree, having papers on laptops because it's kind of annoying if you're like writing something and you're citing papers and you have paper sprawled out all over the desk, as opposed to if you have two screens and you can just look on the one screen, okay, that's what the paragraph says, and then just type away, rephrasing it or citing something. So yeah, papers, laptop, books, physical. Another question I got was, how do you stop yourself from buying new books before you finish your read books? Don't ask me that question. I haven't read all these books and I still continue buying new books. Every month I buy books. I have a budget that I set every month to buy new books. I tell myself I'm a collector, not just a reader. So I don't have an answer for that question. Do my reading goals make me feel pressured? I think yes, and I think a lot of people have this. It's because you can put deadlines on when books are supposed to be finished, but also if you're researching. So like there's kinds of reading, right? Like there's reading where you're just getting ideas and like passively going through the book and that stuff, right? And that's fine, that's all fine. Then there's like reading where you're reading for research, and maybe the research has to be published by a certain date, or maybe you want to finish writing something by a certain date. In that case, yes, you're gonna feel pressurized. But also, a lot of readers, for some reason, like when they're in university, will not translate the reading list building skills that are designed by the university to their own personal reading, which I think people should do, and that should give you a sense of pressure. So like creating a syllabus, like I want to study Israeli history in modern Israel, and so I have a book, like a whole stack of books that I developed, like I grabbed from different like suggestions and sources and whatnot, and I want to finish those in like a 5-month period, okay? So yeah, there's a bit of like pressure to meet deadlines, but that's not intrinsic to reading, it's just having deadlines, right? And I would imagine I'm not the only person who sets deadlines for their reading. So someone asked me, how do you get out of a reading slump? I'm actually not quite sure what that means. So I'm gonna guess here, some people I imagine are maybe reading 2 or 3 books and they don't want to read them anymore, and so maybe it's like dragging on. Or maybe you're not reading anymore, like you're just not where you were before, you're not reading as much, and so you want to read more, and so you think you're in a slump. These are the only 2 things I can really think of. If it's the one case that books are dragging on, just put them down and pick up other books. There are so many other, like if you read, I think for like, I forget the math behind this, but when I was young I used to do it. Well, not that I'm old, but like when I was younger. if you read for like 12 hours a day, every day of your life, you would still read less than 1% of the books out there. And I'm gonna assume that you actually have interest in more than just 1% of the books out there. So it's fine to put books down and read another book and not finish a book. I've done this before. It's totally fine. If you're in a reading slump, then I've never been in like these reading slumps anymore, in the sense that like I haven't been able to read, because I love reading. Like reading is actually something I really, really enjoy. I could read all day. Maybe exercise, you know, get some good endorphins in your brain, get some happy chemicals, and then like make your brain associate those happy chemicals with reading books. So like go for a jog and then go read or something, I don't know. Another question I get is how many books a week do I read? How many pages a day do I read? How many hours a day do I read? Okay, these are very common questions I get. The books a week really depends. I just finished Better Angels of Our Nature, and that book was 200,000 words. That book took me 2 weeks. And I was doing 2 hours a day of that book. A regular nonfiction book is like 70,000 words. So yes, some books are really, really big. Some books are normal sized, okay? Steven Pinker tends to write tomes instead of books. How many hours a day do I read? Just 2, it's 2 hours a day. I try to keep 2. If I have nothing else to do, then I'll try and get more, but usually it's 2. And the pages per day also just varies. Sometimes pages are really thick and heavy to read. Sometimes they're riddled with graphs and the spacing on the font is just massive. You can't really, like, you can't average it out in any meaningful way. You're gonna have to, like, if you really wanted to give an answer to this, you'd have to be like, how many words per day do you read? And even then, your words per minute change depending on whether you're reading fiction or nonfiction. Just try and focus on consistently reading. That's all I have to say about that. Another question I got was, how do I choose books before reading? This question I get a lot actually, and to be honest, I have some answers, but my answer changes just depending on how I chose my recent reading list. I go all over the place. I've made many videos about this, I think 2 or 3 now. If I'm going to study a topic systematically, I will get a bunch of authors that are cited frequently by their books. If I'm just interested in a topic superficially, then I can just buy popular science books of the topic. I'm doing this with epidemiology and virology right now. Or if it's something where I'm looking just for something to write about in life, right? So like, I saw a book on melancholy and I was like, oh, that's interesting, I should write about this, right? And so I got this really big book on melancholy. It's kind of like whimsical. There isn't like a really systematic way of going about it. It just depends at the emotion at the time. Someone asked, what is the most impactful philosophical book that you've ever read? I would have to say this is going to be a tie between 3 books. John Searle's The Construction of Social Reality, The Concept of Law by H.L.A. Hart, and The Philosophy of Walking. These 3 books I still hold with me today in my mind, and I've reread each one of them. Philosophy of Walking is a really good book. John Searle has a lot of good books, but The Construction of Social Reality teaches you how to like view society in terms of formulas. US currency counts as valid currency inside America. So like X counts as Y in C or something like this. That's the framework he provides, and then the concept of law goes over just the understand, like the rationale of why we have legal systems, why legal systems are inevitable, the differences in punishment, the differences in the nuances between like a commandment, a demand, a rule, stuff like this, right? That's why I really like that book. Legal systems are pretty important to society, and that book kind of underlines the whole necessity of why we have a legal system. So those 3 books are like the top 3 philosophical books for me. So someone else said that when they start reading books, they can't finish it even if it's interesting. This can be a problem where the book actually is only interesting superficially, and you don't have like a deep interest in the book. I've had this where I'll pick up books, because I like to read all over the place, I'll pick up books that say like on clockwork, how clocks are designed and made. And although it's an interesting thing to get into, sometimes I just can't finish it because it's not as interesting as I thought it was going to be, or it's not as, how do I say it? I just wasn't interested in it, right? I just didn't care for it. And that's okay, right? Like there's some knowledge in the world that you're just not going to care for, and you can definitely just step away from it and not continue reading the book. I've done that many of times, and you can definitely do that too. Okay, so somebody actually messaged me about my book, which that's shocking because I'm not really trying to sell my book. I need to publish a second edition. There's like errors in the book, and I realized the way I formatted the book is a no-go, okay? I need to reformat that book. That being said, the question was like, how do you read technical books like mine as well as others? So my book is technical only because the first 2 chapters are written really badly, and they're they're really abstract, but I feel like I could have made the language simpler. But if you want to read a book like that, it's going to take you a long time. So people have the same problem with Kant or David Hume. When you read authors like this, you will read every paragraph, almost every paragraph, at least once or twice. Or not okay, guaranteed once. I should say 2 or 3 times. The English is going to be much older, for one. The abstractions you're going to be talking about will be less tangible. And Kant said that like he didn't want to give a lot of examples in his book because if he were to give examples for every abstract thing he's talking about, the book would be way too long. That was his defense. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. What that means is, if let's say you're talking about the categorical imperative, and then you give concrete examples of the categorical imperative, that's going to make the book longer. Or if you're talking about different theories of causation, and you have to give concrete examples for every theory of causation, things will tend to get longer. And if your book is dealing with like already super abstract topics, the book will then have to just, some abstraction is going to have to be punched into the book, right? It's going to have to be forced into the book. Whether you think that's bad writing or not, that's debatable. I do think it's bad writing, but some people don't. Some people think that Hegel is a good writer. I don't think he is. I think he's too abstract, but I think Kant's also a bad writer. So you have to reread every paragraph 2 or 3 times. It's the nature of abstract books. But with my book, I don't think the other chapters are abstract. I think you can skip chapter 2 and 3 and then the rest of the book is good. Okay, so someone else asked me, how do I choose quality books? And this is actually a super good question. So when I first started reading books, I did the really dumb thing where I was like, that's a cool title, I'm gonna read that book. And then as time went on, I realized I kept buying really bad books. Not like consistently, but like for every like 10 books I would get, one of those books would be really bad. So then I said, okay, this has to stop. I'm wasting money here. Let's start reading the table of contents when I get the book, okay? And then maybe my ratio was like, for every 20 books I bought, 1 of them would be bad, okay? So I said, well, we need to do more than just read the table of contents and the cover. So then I started reading the table of contents, the cover, the back, like the back of the book, like the little description. Sometimes it's in the front sleeve. The introductions, the prologues, maybe quickly Googling who the actual writer is. It's not to say that I just don't read books that I disagree with, because I don't agree with a lot of the writers from the Chicago School, but some of the writers from Chicago School have had their PhD since they were like 18. They have published, since they were 18, they were publishing like academic works. So I know when I read their book, like there's a good chance it's gonna have a lot of studies and data to support it, and that's the kind of stuff I look for. So like, yeah, read the table of contents, read the introduction to the book or the prologue, read Google the researcher. Even Goodreads reviews can help. Looking at Goodreads reviews, read the back of the book. That kind of stuff really helps me pick quality content books. Another question that I got actually a lot was, how do I read quicker and absorb more information? I don't know. I'm a really slow reader. Okay, I don't read quick. I don't memorize everything that I read. There's been times where people will say something about a particular book, and I'm like, was that actually in the book? I don't remember that, right? Reading for me isn't about like getting a competitive advantage or like being better as a person. I don't do it for that reason. I enjoy reading. Like, it's actually in the same way that people enjoy video games, I enjoy reading. Does reading make you smarter, and also does reading make you dumber? I would say no to both. There's been studies where like university students in the beginning will take like these kind of quasi-IQ tests, and they'll come out at the end and their fluid reasoning won't go up anymore. Readers, like when we measure people before they start reading, and then they become like avid readers, and they're reading a lot, they don't become any smarter. I don't think reading increases your IQ. I don't think it makes you any smarter, and I don't think it makes you any dumber. I think it's just all going to depend on your perspective and how you understand reading. It can be useful to read because it can give you new mental tools to engage with the world, or you can get better facts and better understand a situation, right? And that stuff can really be helpful. But I don't think simply not reading would put you at a disadvantage, because in all reality, if you want to be successful in life, reading books won't necessarily make you successful, but getting, like, say for example, 5 strong concepts and then using those concepts really well, that could probably help you become successful. Success obviously has a lot more to do with than just reading and concepts, but as it relates to books, you could just read 5 books and you'd be good to go. I actually believe that genuinely. Like, you could just read 5 books and apply those concepts repeatedly, and that would be enough. So reading doesn't make you smarter or dumber, it just depends on the person. So this is a really interesting question. Has reading philosophy and history turned you into like a pessimist or towards despair? And the answer is no. The reason why is because I don't like to romanticize history. I don't like to view them as better than us, that our nature is more inclined towards history. I don't think we were designed to live in trees or in forests any more than we were designed to live in buildings. I think we have gotten better over time, and history is pretty gruesome. Medicine alone, right? Access to clean water, not getting infected by the water you're drinking, life expectancy, levels of absolute famine, like people who are starving to death has gone down. Number of wars. People tend to think that there was more wars now than there has ever been before, but the problem is people don't understand how many wars actually occurred before modern media. And there was actually a little bias that there was an experiment where they asked people to list the number of wars they know about, and they did it in a 5-minute period, and what happened was everybody listed wars from the 20th and 19th century. But they all ignored wars that were in the 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th century. If you actually go and look into the history of wars, you will see there was hundreds of wars you just never heard about because we just didn't have media, and who cares, right? It's a war. Unless you're a historian, you don't care about a war in the 13th or 14th century, okay? So Steven Pinker calls it death by warfares. The number of deaths by warfare was just way higher back then. You could even go to pre-state societies. I know people have critiqued Pinker on this point, where he says in pre-state societies, the per capita deaths per warfare, so the number of deaths per 100,000 per warfare was 1,500 in some of these pre-state societies. And World War II, the number of deaths per war for World War I and World War II was on average 300 or 254. In some of these pre-state societies, it was 1,500, 900, 800. It was really high. And the way we can identify this is looking at the number of wounds on skeletons. So if there's a weapon by, for example, a tomahawk or a spear or some other weapon that's really impractical for hunting, that wouldn't be used for hunting, and it happens to be by a skeleton where there's a bunch of wounds to the skeleton, particularly defensive wounds, we rule this as a death by warfare or death by homicide, one of the two. If we find an arrow tip where there's just blood from 6 or 7 different humans on the arrow tip, and it's the arrow tip is wedged into a skeleton, okay, this is a death by warfare. People like to say that we can't actually get accurate numbers about pre-state society, death by warfare, but even when you're conservative, you have to find a weapon nearby, or there has to be defensive wounds on the skeleton with a weapon nearby, you still get really high numbers. So yeah, history and philosophy haven't made me despair. If anything, they make me a little bit more of a realist, because I think we can revert back to history. I don't think we're intrinsically better because of technology, just alone, and technology helps, but I also think we've changed some of our social values. So the last question I got, well, not actually the last question, there's just way too many questions. The last question I'm going to answer is, do I have a favorite genre of books? And if you were to ask this question to me at age 18, I would have said yes. I probably would have said cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive neuroscience or philosophy. Those two I probably would have said. Those two I was really into at the time. Now, however, so if I was trying to get information about the world, I'd probably have to go with history. Like, there's really something that's fascinating about reading the modern history of a society and seeing where they have come from and where they are now, making that connection. It's almost like you're stepping through time, I guess. I mean, that's what history is, right? That's really fascinating to me, like just getting the modern history of a country, like buying 5 books on modern history of Russia or Israel or Egypt or whatever, right? And reading those books, that's cool. If I were to say, like if you were to come to me and say, okay, Jordan, you're gonna have this one genre of books and every other genre in your library is just gonna disappear, then I'd have to say, like, there's this weird genre, I don't know what to call it, but it's definitely fascinating. I'll give examples of writers. It's like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Michel de Montaigne, Hannah Arendt, just writers like this, writers who aren't writing about a systematic topic, but like they're putting a bunch of what seem to be loosely connected essays into a book, and they're not citing a bunch of sources, they're just providing like intellectual frameworks to consider things, like, I don't know, like Alan Watts. Alan Watts does this. He's not citing sources, he's just teaching you how to view things from a different perspective. John Locke is sometimes like this, John Stuart Mill, Francis Bacon is definitely like this. The essays by Francis Bacon are definitely like this. That genre where it's just like people who are writing about ideas that are commonly found in ordinary life, I guess you could say. That's probably my most favorite genre. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations would be another example. So if I could have 2, I would say history and this weird genre, but if I really had to pick one, I would say like that weird genre of people just writing like meditations and like their opinions about life. With that being said, that's all the questions I'm going to answer for now. Maybe I'll do another one of these videos and you guys can ask some more questions. But choose.